As we stand right now, the trade deadline is 1 week away. The Mets have made a few moves so far. They have acquired Daniel Vogelbach from the Pirates in exchange for Colin Holderman, and they also got Michael Perez, a depth catcher, for cash considerations. Now, as we have been seeing with some Mets fans reacting to these trades so far, the main message that has to get out is the fact that they are not done yet. I understand that maybe the Vogelbach trade doesn't make sense as of right now, but it probably will by the end of the trade deadline. And that's where we come in to solve the wondering for Mets fans. We have our trade deadline checklist for the New York Mets.
On 3-2, Vader. Swings and misses, strike three. He struck him out. 5 net pitchers combined for the second no-hitter in New York Mets history.
One of my main goals here is the fact that this team just has to survive to the trade deadline while they address these issues and try to improve this team from a postseason contender to a World Series contender.
A lot of people are taking a dump in their nappy, being like, "Oh, they're going to give Colin Holderman for a fat guy. They traded for a catcher that he's only hit 6 homers. Whoop-de-doo." That's the first of many teams who are good at depth.
So we have a checklist of 8 things that the Mets need to address at this trade deadline. This starts with a righty killing power bat, which we actually can check off the list already. Daniel Vogelbach was acquired, like we've said earlier, for Colin Holderman just a few days ago. And that brings us to the next part of this, and that is a lefty killing balanced bat. Now, there definitely are tons of options on the trade market, but we're definitely looking for a mix of contact and power. Somebody that we can definitely put in that middle of that lineup that can definitely face lefties, which has definitely been a problem for the Mets this year. Now, who would you say is your top candidate to be a lefty killing balanced bat, or is there like multiple guys that you would go after here?
Top priority is, one, I would like this guy to be able to play multiple positions, because obviously Dan Vogelbach is a big tub. He really only plays I am a hitter. A couple of guys I like. Kyle Farmer from the Cincinnati Reds is a lefty killing, can play short, can play second, can play third. Another guy that I have been personally, I love him because he was a top draft pick, is Brendan Rodgers, who was a top prospect with the Colorado Rockies. He's really only good against lefties, which again, play short, can play second, brings some versatility. And a guy that I've grown on at last year, the Mets had some interest, I think last year at the deadline. He's on Detroit, which you can already see, he's a bat, he's on the Tigers' horrific offense, but he's only hit seem to be coming against left-handed pitching. And that's Robbie Grossman, another outfielder, the Mets' 4th outfielder spot. Again, we have some bigger guys later. The Mets do also need to fill out the bench. Are you sick and tired of seeing JD Davis, Luis Guillorme on the bench? Like, the Mets need a complete retool of their bench. I don't think they're done with bench type moves, especially for a lefty killer.
I personally believe that Vogelbach is the replacement for Dominic Smith. He obviously went to the IL a few days ago. I think this has to replace JD Davis. You look at more of the big fish, obviously. Trey Mancini is one that comes up. You have Josh Bell that comes up. One guy that is not talked about because he has not really been in talks of trade, but the Marlins are kind of falling apart right now, and maybe they do trade, and we've seen them trade in division with Adam Duvall, but Jorge Soler, I do like him. I really wanted to sign him as an extra power anchor bat. And then somebody that we also saw the Mets had a little bit of interest in, JD Martinez, murdering left-handed pitching this year. He is 34 years old. He will most likely be a rental. JD Martinez, Josh Bell, Trey Mancini, Jorge Soler.
Of the 3, JD Martinez is the best option. I get a lot of people have been on this Josh Bell trade. I've made it clear, and I want nothing to do with him. He's got good splits this year against lefties, but if you look historically in his career, he sucks against left-handed pitching. This year he's been great. Could it just be a walk year guy? You see this story all the time. They have their best seasons when they're in their walk year. Trey Mancini was a guy that, like, of the 2, I preferred Mancini over Bell. Give you a little more positional flexibility, play the corner outfield, play first base, obviously be a DH. But now that JD Martinez, that they've monitored the situation, if he's available, he's the guy to go get. If you're going to give up decent prospects, maybe that starts with Mark Vientos, Matt Allen to an extent. Me and you are both more willing to move him than most people are. JD is the type of guy you see in the postseason. He is, with the Red Sox on that run, he shows up in the big moment. A top 3 DH overall in baseball the last 5 years. All this guy does is absolutely mash. There's your protection for Pete. That's what you need. For me, if JD Martinez is on the market, he becomes the best bat on the trade market this year.
Another guy that you can put out there is Brandon Drury, obviously, but there is some concerns with him in the home ballpark he is in there. We had him last year. He was pretty good off the bench, but I don't really think that really establishes the power projection around Alonso.
For me, Drury goes in like the last category we're talking about, where he's going to be a bench bat. Again, on a good team, he's a bench player. On a bad team like the Reds, he's a starter. So you put him with him and Vogelbach as, late in the game, there's a righty in the mound, you go to Vogelbach, lefty on the mound, you go to Brandon Drury.
Next thing we got on the list is a utility bench player. In my eyes, this would be someone to replace our fourth outfielder job that is currently held by Travis Jankowski. It was held by Khalil Lee for a little bit. It was held by Nick Plummer. Now listen, Travis Jankowski, great speed, great defense, but he's just a liability in a lot of reasons. With a utility player, we definitely can get a lot of versatility, whether they play in the infield, they play in the outfield, and also they can, hit pretty well off the bench. Ian Happ is someone, obviously, all-star year coming off of that this year, and he's really hit his stride, hits a lot of fly balls, and also he can play pretty good defense, provide you value on both sides of the ball.
Ian Happ is a guy I think is going to be for contenders as a starting caliber. I do like Ian Happ. I think he'd be a great fourth outfielder on a contender, but I would probably expect a team that desperately needs starting outfielders to bid hard for Ian Happ.
When you look at this team's lineup every day, and especially in the lower half, Luis Guillorme can't be playing every day. Guillorme can definitely be a huge part of this team, but off the bench. He just cannot be playing every day, and he has been playing every day, and I think a lot of people are getting sick of it. And that's where kind of guys who can play the infield and the outfield, like Kike Hernandez, comes in, and John Birdie, who is a infamous Met killer, but, another team, the Marlins, they will trade in division. They've proven that before.
I've brought up, obviously, John Birdie is a historic pain in the Mets seems to ever since he put on a Marlin jersey. But I saw Birdie as a more versatile version of Travis Jankowski. He's a pinch runner. Again, he plays for the Marlins. He's every day because they suck. And he can play second, play third, he plays short, he can play the outfield. And Birdie brings you some more offensive ability than Travis Jankowski. And then Kike Hernandez. He's been my number one target since May. His biggest roles, obviously, last year with the Red Sox. Showed up in the postseason. Always kills left-handed pitching, and you can play him literally everywhere.
Travis Jankowski is a great role player. He plays his role, but I'm not going to waste a roster spot on a guy that can run. Really see that much value in that because you need somebody to get on base. It needs to be late in the game. You also need to be down one run for it to be important. I mean, it's just so specific of how this guy can actually show value to this team.
Yeah, I disagree to an extent. He could have a role if the bench was better. And that's the biggest thing. If the Mets actually had a big league bench, you can keep Travis Jankowski on this team as the extra outfielder and as a runner. But the fact the Mets bench is pathetic, it shows how he can't be on this team. If the Mets were to add a legit bench, there could be a value to having a bench runner. But the Mets don't have that bench.
It's a very specific scenario where you can use him. And I just don't think it's worth a spot on the bench when your offense basically is as stagnant as it can be from just the starting nine. Next thing on the list we have is high leverage lefty relievers. We've definitely seen a shortage of lefties for a while. We've definitely gone through a lone lefty graveyard recently. We saw Chasen Shreve basically collapse a month into the season and he was DFA'd. We also have Joely Rodriguez, who is a fantastic contact manager, but he sometimes has problems throwing strikes. We don't really have someone that we can call a lefty specialist or call someone to get out of a jam to be a high leverage type of arm. What are some of the choices that are out there? We know there are some lefties out there that you can get for really cheap.
The top two, in my opinion, are Andrew Chafin from Detroit, and if available, which the Mets have called, is Joe Mantiply. You could also throw a guy like Gregory Soto, who has a walk issue. You can throw him in the conversation. If you want to go lesser, you could throw Richard Blair as another potential option as a lefty out of the pen. Again, Chafin is the guy who most Mets fans have interest in and wanted to sign in the offseason. And then you look at Joe Mantiply, guy who really has come out of nowhere this year, has had a really good year. And then Gregory Soto, guy throws 100, big arm, but kind of Miguel Castro to an extent. Got a good sinker, doesn't know where the hell it's going. And then Richard Blair, again, another in-division type trade. Again, you're looking at those type of guys for lefties. Could there be some more shock? Other guys, maybe with the Royals, maybe move Amir Garrett, would the Reds trade Mike Minor, but they both suck. Pick out if they want to go high leverage lefty. Do they want to go a loogie, as they used to call him, just a guy who can just get lefties out? That's for Billy Epler and that front office to decide.
Yeah, Yeah, another guy I do like is Brett Martin, kind of a late bloomer recently. He does have a little bit of a control, ground ball specialist, amazing breaking stuff, throws a lot of strike. That's something we haven't really heard much about, but you talk about some lefties for cheap. I think Brett Martin is somebody that they could look for, and you definitely could possibly turn him into a high leverage reliever, how good he is situationally. Now, just like we need southpaws, we also need right-handed high leverage relievers. This year, this has definitely been a problem outside of Edwin Diaz. Adam Ottavino has definitely been good as the second guy, but they also need some guys to get the bridge. Now, it does sting to trade Colin Holderman. It looks like they are looking to replace a lot of these spots in the bullpen. Trevor May also is another option that they have as a high leverage reliever when he gets back. You also have Tyler McGill, where there's no timetable for him to return, but he most likely will be moving to the bullpen as well. But for the meantime, getting to those moments where the bullpen is fully healthy, we definitely need some high leverage righty relievers as well.
There's tiers to what interest the Mets want to do. There's obviously the low end cheap rentals, the guys like David Robertson and Daniel Bard, like Chris Martin, who is maybe a lower end guy. And then you go to your kind of dream scenarios, and that you go to the Jorge Lopez's, and obviously for me, David Bednar. Bednar's not going to happen, but pretty well that David Robertson's going to be a Met with the obviously being able to pitch in New York and Epler having some connections with him. Could there be some maybe out of nowhere guys? I mean, there's some, you can think of a few on other teams. You could be a surprise, hey, just selling high on a reliever, and don't be surprised if a reliever is having a bad year and the Mets take a flyer on him to say, hey, that's a kind of a la Addison Reed. Had a bad year, comes to the Mets, has a good 2-month stretch.
Now, Edwin Diaz has obviously been the elite reliever that we traded for back in 2019 this year. Adam Ottavino has been good for 90% of his outings, but they're not going to be available every day. The circle of trust, as we've talked about with Buck Showalter, it's definitely thinning out with Seth Lugo not doing well, Drew Smith not doing well, Colin Holderman has been traded, Trevor May's been hurt, and when he was healthy, he was not pitching well. And this personally, I think, is a top 2 priority for them at the deadline out of all of these items on the checklist. Next up we got is add rotation depth. Now, obviously our rotation has gone through quite a few injuries, especially at the top with the 1 and 2 of Jake and Max. But what we're looking for here is kind of those Trevor Williams types of arms. You can see them out of the bullpen. You can see them in the rotation, be those types of spot starts, just to give you a little bit more depth.
Obviously, my saying is if you think you have enough pitching, you don't, because again, look what the Mets rotation. You can have a healthy rotation for a week and then boom, a week of hell, and especially how made of glass these pitchers are today. You're one bad week to lose 2 to 3 guys, and now you're starting Thomas Sapucki if he's still here again. I thought Caleb Smith from Arizona, a guy who's multi-versatile, could be a starter. Potentially put him in the bullpen. You can use him as a spot starter. Jacob Junis of the San Francisco Giants, the 5th starter for them. The Mets, I believe, had some interest in him in the offseason before the Giants signed him. So it's maybe another guy Epler likes, a guy like a Drew Smiley. That's the type of guy where the Mets need to add. I like what Epler said, where he's going to be opportunistic. If you get an ability to add a quality starter, Tyler Mahle level, and for nothing, pounce. Because banking on guys coming off injuries, which again, we're in the position that one bad fastball and he's out for a year. So for me, pitching, rotation, bullpen, you can never have enough. Even if you think you do, you really don't.
Other names that I do want to put out here, guys like Brady Singer, someone who hasn't really proven much yet, but he has shown some strides of quality. Another guy, Merrill Kelly, he's been in the league for a little bit. Another guy that I also want to put out there is Anthony Kay, former prospect. He was traded for Marcus Stroman. He started to pitch to his potential a little bit. He's currently in AAA right now.
Kind of another Adonis Medina level prospect where he had a lot of potential and then gets traded and goes where he was in a bad organization, just never developed. Again, a couple of former Mets potentially fill that. I mean, Justin Dunn, he's injured, I believe, right now. Anthony Kay, again, we traded for Marcus Stroman. Could be, again, a guy with started to show some potential.
I think the mindset here is try to find your 10th man to replace Thomas Sapucki. That's what we're kind of looking at. Someone who can start, but also can be an extra arm in the bullpen. Because again, like we've said, you can never have enough pitching. So our second to last on the checklist here is something that's kind of unlikely for it to happen, but you never know. And that has to be exploring and catching upgrade. We've seen James McCann. He's been injured this year, but when he's playing, he is just not done anything. Tomas Nido, he kind of became the starting catcher, and he does not really provide much offensively. You're just not really getting anything from this position. Patrick Mazeika has been terrible as well. Now, they did bring in Michael Perez, who has probably hit for more power than all of our catchers combined this year, but he was obviously optioned down to AAA to get some swings in because he has not really had some ABs for a while. Now, there are a select few of catchers that could be on the market. I think we all know who the big names are. How likely would you see the Mets kind of going for a Wilson Contreras, or what would be the package around that?
They should be going, especially if they're already talking to the Cubs about David Robertson. Maybe they weren't targeting potentially JD Martinez and Josh Bell. He could have been the perfect complement to the left side of that DH. He does historically murder left-handed pitching. That's what kind of his big offensive numbers are against lefties. Adding a catcher late in the deadline, obviously you would have to learn a completely new staff during a pennant race. And I guess that's the big thing for why they don't want to do it. I get it. He would have to learn the new staff completely over, but he can't be worse than Tomas Nido and Patrick Mazeika. Like, I don't know how many more times you can send these guys out.
Most of this thought actually just comes from the fact that they're not looking to rush Francisco Alvarez. And I completely agree with that. Sandy Alderson has said Alvarez needs to learn how to hit AAA pitching, and then he will be considered to be called up, which I completely understand. Now, you look at the offensive production from the catcher position, it really has just not been good, no matter who you put out there, and it's just been an automatic out. It's like the pitcher batting. That's literally how bad the offensive value has been from the catcher position. Another guy I want to throw out here, of course, someone a little bit more under control, and it also hits the bonus of somebody who destroys lefties, Carson Kelly.
It'd be interesting because obviously he has a little bit of control. I'm a big fan of bundling, and maybe Mantiply plus Carson Kelly. I wouldn't start with any of the top five, but I'd fight to keep Plummer. I'd prefer it to be Khalil Lee, maybe a Dominic Hamill, guys to that extent. I don't think it would cost as much as obviously maybe a Contreras plus Robertson, but also you're battling the fact that if you're trading for two rentals, I think it might be cheaper. And I think the Mets would probably prefer the Wilson Contreras route because, like we said, Alvarez is being the big key. Again, I don't expect him to address the catching situation. They've made it clear, barring they can get it done on a cheap on-margin deal.
Of course, Carson Kelly is more of a future piece, and you look at that, but Wilson Contreras will be a possible rental. Maybe you do bring him back, but they need a better stopgap to Alvarez than McCann, Nido, or Mazeika, because this has just not been good. And then we get to the final part of this checklist, which is moving JD Davis and Dom Smith. Whether they are in a deal for one of the relievers or maybe a utility player, it's enough already. I understand how likable they are, but they are really, really hurting this team in terms of versatility and just talent overall. They really have just not produced, and it's time to let go of these two pinheads.
Like, I just farted right now, and that probably has been more effective than anything JD Davis or Dom Smith's done all year.
I can smell it from here.